It is the summer of 1958, and a young Soviet fighter pilot named Viktor Kozhedub is standing on the frozen tarmac of an airbase near Murmansk, staring at a grainy photograph that has been passed hand to hand through the pilot's ready room like a forbidden relic. The image shows a silver needle poised against the California sky, a shape so alien it looks more like a rocket than an airplane. The senior political officer has warned them not to discuss it openly, but every pilot in the regiment has seen the numbers published by the Fédération Aéronautique Internationale in Paris. The Americans have just claimed both the world speed record and the world altitude record with a single machine. Kozhedub has flown the MiG-19, the pride of Soviet aviation, and he knows its limits intimately. He knows that at 45,000 feet, the air becomes thin and treacherous, that above Mach 1.3, the controls grow heavy and sluggish. The numbers attributed to this American phantom are beyond comprehension. Speed of 1,404 miles per hour, altitude of 91,243 feet. These are not the statistics of an airplane. These are the statistics of a ballistic missile. Yet the reports insist there is a man inside, a pilot who can steer this thing, who can point it where he wants it to go. Kozhedub looks at the photograph again, at those impossibly small wings, and he feels something he has not felt since his first combat sortie. He feels afraid. The fear that grips Viktor Kozhedub is not unique. It is spreading through the Soviet air defense forces like a virus, infecting radar operators and ground controllers, design engineers and party officials. The reports coming from the northern interception stations are filled with language that borders on the supernatural. Operators describe targets that climb vertically at speeds that should tear any aircraft apart. They describe radar signatures that vanish off the top of their scopes, ascending into regions of the atmosphere where no propeller or jet engine has ever operated. The scrambled interceptors return with their pilots shaken, reporting that they pushed their MiGs to the absolute structural limits and still watched the intruder pull away as if they were standing still. In the classified briefing rooms of the PVO Strany, the Soviet Air Defense Command, senior officers gather around tables covered with calculations that refuse to make sense. The mathematics of aerodynamics, as they understand them, do not permit what the Americans are doing. A wing that small cannot generate enough lift to keep an aircraft aloft at landing speeds. An engine that powerful should tear itself apart from the heat. A fuselage that thin should crumple like paper in a high G turn. Yet the evidence is undeniable. The Americans have built something that ignores the rules. The mystery deepens when Soviet intelligence begins to assemble a composite picture of the machine's design. The reports from agents in California describe a philosophy of construction that seems almost suicidal. The aircraft, designated F-104 by the Americans, has been stripped of everything that Soviet engineers consider essential for a combat aircraft. The wings are not just small, they are razor thin, with leading edges sharpened to the thickness of a knife blade. Field agents report that American ground crews must install protective covers over these edges when the aircraft is parked, not to protect the aluminum from damage, but to prevent mechanics from slicing their arms and necks simply by walking past. The fuel capacity is minimal, barely enough for an hour of flight. The cockpit is cramped, squeezed tight around the massive engine that dominates the fuselage. There is almost no room for the pilot to move, no space for the complex avionics systems that Soviet designers consider necessary for navigation and targeting. The conclusion that begins to form in the minds of the Soviet analysts is disturbing in its implications. The Americans have not built a fighter aircraft. They have wrapped a cockpit around an engine, and accepted whatever compromises that decision required. They have built a missile with a man inside. The designation that emerges from the intelligence reports is the F-104 Starfighter, and the name itself seems to mock the Soviets. A fighter that can reach the stars, that can climb into the black edge of space, where the sky turns dark even at noon. The Soviet response is predictable. The design bureaus are summoned to emergency sessions. The Mikoyan-Gurevich team, the Sukhoi team, and the Yakovlev team are all tasked with developing countermeasures. But the engineers who study the photographs and the performance data find themselves paralyzed by a fundamental question. How do you counter a machine that can simply outrun anything you send after it? The MiG-21, still in development, promises speeds of Mach 2, but the F-104 is already demonstrating those capabilities in operational service. The Soviet heavy interceptors can climb to 60,000 feet, but the Starfighter has already been photographed at 90,000 feet, an altitude where the curvature of the Earth is visible and the pilot must wear a full pressure suit to survive. The radar networks that protect the motherland are designed to track bombers cruising at 40,000 feet. What good are they against a target that can dash through the coverage gaps at twice the speed of sound? The panic intensifies when intelligence reveals that the Americans are not keeping the Starfighter in California. They are deploying it to Europe, to the very borders of the Soviet sphere. The first squadrons arrive in West Germany in 1960, and for the veterans of the Great Patriotic War, the sight of German pilots climbing into the cockpits of the world's fastest aircraft is a nightmare made manifest. Less than 15 years have passed since the fall of Berlin, and now the Luftwaffe is reborn, equipped with machines that can penetrate Soviet airspace with impunity. The strategic implications are terrifying. A Starfighter can take off from a German airfield, cross into East Germany at 50,000 feet, and be over Moscow in minutes. The Soviet air defense network, built at enormous cost to protect against American B-52 bombers, is suddenly obsolete. The bombers fly at 600 miles per hour. The Starfighter flies at 1,400. By the time the interceptors are scrambled, by the time the surface-to-air missiles are tracking, the target is already gone. But as the months pass and the intelligence reports continue to accumulate, the Soviet analysts begin to notice something strange. The Starfighter is not behaving the way a superweapon should behave. A superweapon should be carefully guarded, deployed sparingly, and reserved for the most critical missions. The Americans are doing none of these things. They are mass-producing the F-104 at an astonishing rate. They are selling it to their NATO allies. They are handing it out like candy to air forces across the globe. Germany, Italy, Japan, Canada, the Netherlands, Belgium, Denmark, Norway, Spain, Greece, Turkey, Pakistan, Jordan, and Taiwan. The list grows longer every year. By the mid-1960s, there are more Starfighters in service outside the United States than inside it. The Soviets find this behavior inexplicable. If you have developed a revolutionary weapon that can outperform everything your enemy possesses, you do not give it away. You keep it secret. You maintain your advantage. Unless, of course, the weapon is not what it appears to be. The first hints of the Starfighter's true nature come from the crash reports. Soviet intelligence has cultivated sources within the NATO air forces, and the information they provide is disturbing. The F-104 is not just fast, it is deadly, and not only to its enemies. The accident rate is climbing in every nation that operates the aircraft. In West Germany, the statistics are catastrophic. Starfighters are falling out of the sky at a rate that would be considered unacceptable for a peacetime training program, let alone an operational combat force. The pilots are calling it the Widowmaker. They are calling it the flying coffin. They are calling it the lawn dart, because when it loses power, it does not glide. It plunges straight down like a dart thrown at the grass. The Soviet analysts struggle to understand how this can be true. The Americans have built the fastest aircraft in the world, an aircraft that can outclimb and outrun anything the Soviet Union possesses, and it is killing its own pilots at a rate that suggests fundamental design flaws. The technical explanation begins to emerge from captured maintenance manuals and debriefings of defectors. The F-104's tiny wings, those knife-edged marvels of aerodynamic efficiency, are a Faustian bargain. They are perfect for high-speed flight in a straight line. They slice through the shockwaves of supersonic travel with minimal drag. But they are catastrophic for anything else. The wing loading, the ratio of aircraft weight to wing area, is the highest of any fighter in history. This means that the Starfighter must maintain tremendous speed to generate enough lift to stay airborne. At low speeds, those tiny wings simply cannot grab enough air. The aircraft does not stall gracefully, settling into a gentle descent that allows the pilot to regain control. It stalls violently, pitching forward and entering an unrecoverable dive. And the engine, that magnificent General Electric J79 that produces 15,000 pounds of thrust with afterburner, has a fatal vulnerability. The air intake is designed for smooth laminar flow. If the pilot maneuvers too aggressively, yawing or pitching the nose, the airflow becomes turbulent. The engine chokes. It stalls. The technical term is compressor stall, and it sounds almost clinical. But the reality is terrifying. The engine does not simply wind down. It backfires with a sound like a cannon shot, and the thrust drops to zero instantaneously. In any other aircraft, the pilot would have time to restart the engine or glide to a landing. In the Starfighter, with its minimal wings and massive weight, the loss of thrust is a death sentence. The most chilling detail in the Soviet reports concerns the ejection system. The engineers who designed the F-104 knew that the high-tail configuration posed a mortal danger to ejecting pilots. At supersonic speeds, a pilot who ejected upward would be thrown directly into the horizontal stabilizer and cut in half. The logical solution would have been to redesign the tail. The American solution was to redesign the ejection seat. The early models of the F-104 are equipped with a downward-firing ejection seat. In the event of an emergency, the pilot does not rocket upward to safety. He is blasted downward, through the bottom of the aircraft. This system works adequately at high altitude, but most emergencies occur during takeoff and landing, when the aircraft is close to the ground. A pilot who ejects downward at 500 feet is not saved. He is fired directly into the runway. The Soviet analysts who read these reports cannot believe what they are seeing. The Americans, who lecture the world about the value of human life, have built an aircraft that requires its pilots to choose between crashing with the plane or ejecting into the concrete. They have built a machine that treats the human inside as an expendable component. The question that consumes the Soviet intelligence apparatus is no longer about speed or altitude. It is about motivation. Why are the Americans doing this? Why are their NATO allies accepting these aircraft? The West German Luftwaffe alone has purchased 916 Starfighters. By 1966, they are losing them at a rate of nearly one per week. The German press is running front-page stories about widows and orphans. Politicians are demanding investigations. And still, the aircraft keep flying. Still, the orders keep coming. The Soviets have assumed that there must be a military justification, some secret capability that makes the losses acceptable. They search for hidden weapons systems, classified avionics, revolutionary tactics. They find nothing. The F-104 is exactly what it appears to be: a fast, fragile, unforgiving aircraft that is fundamentally unsuited for the weather, terrain, and mission profiles of European air combat. The truth, when it finally emerges, is not discovered by Soviet spies. It is revealed by the American government itself. In 1975, a Senate subcommittee investigating foreign corrupt practices uncovers a web of bribery that stretches across 3 continents. The Lockheed Corporation, manufacturer of the F-104, has been paying millions of dollars in bribes to foreign officials to secure contracts for the Starfighter. The recipients include princes in the Netherlands, cabinet ministers in Italy, and high-ranking officers in the Japanese self-defense forces. In West Germany, the decision to purchase 916 Starfighters instead of the safer, more capable alternatives was influenced by payments to defense officials and political parties. The aircraft that has been killing German pilots at an unprecedented rate was not chosen because it was the best aircraft available. It was chosen because Lockheed paid the right people to choose it. For Soviet analysts, this revelation is both vindicating and disturbing. They have spent nearly 2 decades trying to understand the F-104 as a military weapon, searching for the strategic logic behind its deployment. There was no strategic logic. There was only profit. The Americans have compromised the security of their allies, have sent hundreds of young pilots to their deaths, have equipped the NATO air forces with a fundamentally flawed weapon system, all to enrich a corporation. The Soviets have their own corruption, their own inefficiencies, their own deadly mistakes, but they have never imagined that capitalism could produce something this grotesque. The missile with a man in it was not designed to defeat the Soviet Union. It was designed to defeat Northrop and Dassault in the competition for foreign sales. The pilots who died were not casualties of the Cold War. They were casualties of the arms trade. But history is not finished with the F-104. The final judgment comes not from congressional hearings or crash investigations, but from actual combat. In December 1971, war erupts between India and Pakistan. The Indian Air Force flies Soviet MiG-21s. The Pakistani Air Force flies American F-104s. For the first time, the 2 philosophies of fighter design meet in battle. The Soviet advisors attached to the Indian forces expect the worst. They have read the performance specifications. They know the Starfighter is faster, that it can climb higher, that it can outrun any missile the Indians possess. They prepare their pilots for hit-and-run attacks, for slashing supersonic passes that leave no time to react. The reality of combat shatters these expectations. The Pakistani F-104s come in fast, exactly as predicted. They fire their cannons and streak through the combat zone at Mach 1. But then they make a fatal mistake. They try to turn around for a second pass. In the physics of air combat, there is a concept called energy maneuverability. Every turn bleeds speed. Every climb costs energy. A well-designed fighter can turn tightly while maintaining enough speed to remain effective. The F-104 cannot. As the Pakistani pilots bank hard, those tiny wings that slice through straight-line flight so beautifully become liabilities. They cannot generate enough lift to change the aircraft's direction without massive speed loss. The Starfighters that entered the fight as supersonic missiles exit their turns as sluggish, struggling targets. The Indian MiG-21s, with their broad delta wings, pivot inside the F-104's turning circles. They close the distance. They fire. The results of the 1971 war are a humiliation for the Starfighter and a vindication for Soviet design philosophy. The aircraft that held the world speed record, the aircraft that could climb to the edge of space, the aircraft that had terrified Soviet pilots for over a decade, is helpless in a dogfight. It cannot turn. It cannot sustain energy. It cannot fight. The reports that flow back to Moscow describe Pakistani F-104s shot down by MiG-21s in close combat, destroyed not by missiles, but by cannon fire. The missile with a man in it has met a real war, and it has failed. The legacy of the F-104 Starfighter is written in two languages. The first language is tragedy. By the time the aircraft is finally retired from service in the 1990s, it has killed more than 500 pilots in peacetime accidents. In West Germany alone, 116 pilots died flying the Widowmaker. Many of them were young men, conscripts and volunteers, who trusted that their government would not put them in a death trap. Their trust was betrayed by engineers who prioritized speed over safety, by executives who prioritized profit over lives, and by officials who accepted bribes instead of demanding better alternatives. The graves scattered across Europe and Asia are the true memorial to the F-104, a monument to the human cost of corruption and hubris. The second language is transformation. The disaster of the Starfighter program forced a revolution within the American military aviation establishment. A group of analysts and pilots known as the Fighter Mafia studied the F-104's failures and concluded that speed alone was meaningless. They developed a new theory of fighter design called energy maneuverability, which emphasized the ability to gain and maintain energy in combat. They argued that a fighter must be able to turn, to climb, to accelerate, to sustain high-G maneuvers without bleeding speed. They used the F-104 as the negative example, the cautionary tale, the proof of what happened when designers forgot that combat was chaos and not a straight line. From this intellectual ferment emerged the F-15 Eagle and the F-16 Fighting Falcon, aircraft that combined the Starfighter's speed with the turning ability it lacked. These new fighters terrified the Soviets far more than the F-104 ever had, because they could not be dismissed as expensive failures. They were the synthesis of everything the Americans had learned from their mistakes. The missile with a man in it had taught them that the man mattered, that survival was not a luxury but a necessity, that an aircraft which killed its own pilots in peacetime would lose its pilots in wartime before they could become experienced enough to fight effectively. Viktor Kozhedub, the young Soviet pilot who stared at that grainy photograph in 1958, lived long enough to see the F-104 relegated to history's footnotes. He flew MiG-21s and later MiG-29s. He trained a generation of Soviet pilots to fear the F-15 and respect the F-16. But he never forgot the summer day when he first saw the silver needle and felt the cold touch of fear. The F-104 Starfighter was the most beautiful failure of the Cold War, a machine that promised the stars and delivered the grave. It was the embodiment of an age that believed technology could solve any problem, that speed could overcome any obstacle, that the laws of physics and the limits of human endurance could be ignored if the engineering was clever enough. The missile with a man in it proved that none of these beliefs were true. The sky does not forgive arrogance. The air does not care about speed records. And a machine that cannot bring its pilot home is not a weapon. It is a tomb.